Welcome, everyone. My name is Isu Ma'at. I am the Chief Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Officer for the Orlando Magic and its affiliates. I am excited today for this conversation, our latest installment of the Walk With Us Town Hall series. This conversation in celebration of Juneteenth as we explore the African-American journey from Juneteenth to Black excellence. We have some incredible guests with us today on the panel, so please join me in welcoming Ashley Bell, co-founder and general counsel for the National Black Bank Foundation. Ashley, I think you're on mute. There you go.
Thank you, brother. Appreciate you for having me. I lost you for a second.
Mayor Eddie Cole from Eatonville. Good morning.
Good morning. Good. So honored to be here.
We're just saying good morning to you and complimenting you on how dapper you look, brother.
Well, thank you.
And you too, Mayor Cole. Dr. Jeremy Levitt, founder and president of the Stono Institute and a distinguished professor of international law at Florida A&M University. Good morning.
Good morning. Great to be with you.
Thank you. Dr. Bridget Williams, Chief of Staff, Orange County Public Schools. Welcome.
Good morning.
Dr. Williams.
Good morning, and thank you.
And last but not least, a man who needs no introduction. His reputation speaks for himself. Outstanding superstar athlete for the Orlando Magic, Markelle Fultz.
Good morning. It's a blessing to be here. Thank you.
Thanks for coming. Before we get to questions for the panel, we do have, as we always do, some poll questions to kind of set the table here. So please, if you would, use your phone to scan the QR code on your screen or visit slido.com, that's SLIDO.com, and enter the event code Walk With Us. You'll also have an opportunity to submit your questions for any of our panelists on Slido as well, and we'll open it up to the audience for questions at the end of the conversation. And so the poll question should be on your screen. I am going to pull it up as well. Or maybe we can get the QR code up here. Now, panelists, feel free to participate. There will be a test at the end here to see who got all the answers right. Okay, Juneteenth is the oldest nationally celebrated commemoration of the ending of slavery in the United States. True or false is the first question. Clearly, this is a trick question, but we have tricked no one. Everyone just about has the correct answer, which is true for sure. Next question. They get a little harder, folks, as we go along. Let's see. Next question. Roughly how many people were freed from slavery in Galveston, Texas on June 19th, 1865? I told you it gets a little more difficult as we move along here. It's either 20 people, 250,000 people, 150,000 people, or 65,000 people. Fire away. This is interesting, Dr. Levitt, Dr. Williams. It's neck and neck here between 65,000 and 250,000. 65,000 is in the lead, however. And I am going to stop the madness and say that the correct answer, survey says, is 250,000 people. Next question. Teeing you up here, Mr. Bell. Freedmen's Savings Bank was a private savings bank chartered by the U.S. Congress on March 3rd, 1865 to collect deposits from newly emancipated communities. What was the total value of assets held by the Freedmen's Savings Bank when it dissolved in 1872? Was it 3.7 million, which would be $80 million today? Was it 750,000, which would be roughly $20 million today, or $10 million, which would translate to $120 million today? What say you all? Mr. Bell, we have tricked no one. Our audience has done their homework and by and large are clear that value is $3.7 million, which translates into $80 million today. And for the last question, Slido team, tee it up. Final question. Despite the lives lost in the slave trade, despite the losses in the massacres of Black communities like Black Wall Street and the collapse of the Freedmen Savings Bank, which we just discussed, what percentage of Americans currently support reparations for the African American community? The correct answer is close. It's neck and neck here. But it's like watching the horse race, right? They're going back and forth here, the lines across the screen. But the correct answer is, as it says here on the screen, most of you are correct. Currently, only 29% of Americans support reparations for the African American community. Distinguished panelists, that was the kind of table setter for our conversation this morning. And so I want to come to you all. And Mayor Cole, I'm coming to you first, because Eatonville was settled only 22 years after Juneteenth. And so as the first city settled by African Americans in this country, what can you tell us about these early barrier breakers? Who were they? Why were they successful? And what can we learn from them today?
Well, it's amazing because it's a true love story. When you think about Eatonville and Maitland, they are connected at the hip. Most of the people from Maitland was from the North. So they had this real point of freedom anyway for African Americans. I'm so fortunate to live just around the corner from the lake where all Blacks and whites live. It was called Lake Sibelia and Lake Lily. And when I walk early in the morning, sometimes I feel like I can see those and feel the spirits of them just sitting there and doing whatever they were doing. But what was so crazy about it was they understood something we didn't understand. A young man named Joseph Clark, who lived with Josiah Eaton, he lived with him. And I can imagine this Mr. Josiah Eaton, who was a white man, just said, you know what? I see something in that young guy. And that young guy kept his, and he was an educated man, Joseph Clark. And he said, out of nowhere, he said, I wish we had our own land. I just wish we had he kept dreaming like that. And before you know it, Mr. Josiah Eaton sold some land to Mr. Joseph Clark, as well as Lewis Lawrence. And the name Eatonville comes from a white man, Josiah Eaton. The first church in Eatonville is St. Lawrence. That comes from Mr. Lewis Lawrence. And it's amazing what transpired at that time was opportunity, just giving them an opportunity, a handshake. And what can we learn from it this time in our life? Man, can you imagine if our Congress and our senators and all could just give a handshake and give a person an opportunity? So what did they know then that we didn't know now? Created what Eatonville is now, just an opportunity.
Absolutely. Love that. Markel, I want to come to you really quick. When you hear this history, right? How does it land with you? How does it inspire you? What thoughts go through your mind?
I think when I hear this information for myself, I wasn't really taught too much about African American history and the significance of the dates in school. So now as an adult, as I'm learning more, it really just drives me to try to use the platform that I have now to not only learn more about it, but try to educate my peers in the younger generation and people that I can impact on trying to educate themselves more on this stuff. Well said.
Well said. Ashley Bell, let's continue this trip down memory lane. On May 31st, we kind of remembered the 100-year anniversary of the Greenwood District, otherwise known as Black Wall Street, the massacre there in Tulsa, Oklahoma. How did this history, how did the history of this community and communities similar inspire the mission of the National Black Bank Foundation and the work that you all are doing?
Thank you for that question. And first off, I just want to say that, there's so many people probably that are first time hearing this that can watch it. And I want to just appreciate the Orlando Magic for taking the time to have this conversation and appreciate you for leading us today. When we talk about history, when you look at what happened in Tulsa, and I was there for the 100th anniversary with my board, Hill Harper's on my board, actor and activist Hill Harper. And Hill and I were there talking about that exact same phenomenon of Tulsa being the first location in America where Americans were actually bombed by aerial bombing. Before Pearl Harbor, before 9/11, first people in this country to be bombed by air were Black people in Tulsa. And we talk about this because what was the outrage rooted in? It was rooted in the fact that those that sought to oppress African Americans knew that financial independence and ability to create wealth was an avenue for Black people to have equality, true equality. So it was the bombing of opportunity, not just Tulsa, right? Even when you go back to what you mentioned earlier, the Freedmen's Bureau, what's lost in the story of the Freedmen's Bureau is not just the fact that most of the Black wealth was wiped away, but then in the founding of the Freedmen's Bureau, being that it is classified technically as the first Black bank for Black people, was that written in its charter was the prohibition for this bank to give credit or to allow loans. Now, what is a bank if you can't get a loan? But it was purposefully put into the charter of the Freedmen's Savings and Trust was to make sure that even though these free slaves were going to take their pennies and put them into the bank, that the bank could not leverage their own wealth to create wealth in the community. It couldn't loan. Credit is like water. Every community that has it, it grows. Those that don't, they do not. So the strangling of credit and access to credit and opportunity for our people historically has always been used as an unseen weapon of oppression and a way to keep our community from creating the wealth. And that has always been the root of what we talk about in employment and access to opportunities for our children.
And so, I know Kevin Garnett is a part of the effort here with the National Black Bank Foundation as well. Talk a little bit more about the foundation and what the foundation is doing to kind of counteract what you just laid out.
Well, Kevin Garnett is a good example. He helps lead our corporate advisory board. This is the brother that comes from the South, who had that, like many of us, that history of distrust in the banking system. Kevin kept millions of dollars under his bed when he got his first check because he didn't trust putting it in the bank. And that's just a legacy of what's been passed down from our great-great-grandparents that had money they lost in the Freedmen's Bank, all the way down to people that had money lost in the Tulsas all around the South, from Raleigh to Atlanta to Tulsa and around. So what we're trying to do is help people remember that Black banks are important. And I think that what crystallized the moment for us to create the National Black Bank Foundation was COVID. When COVID hit, I was working at SBA. I was your regional administrator at the Small Business Administration. And what happened was Congress created a program called the Payroll Protection Program, PPP, but said the only way you can get it is you got to go through a bank. Well, 65% of Black people are either unbanked or unbanked. So a system was created to allow you to get out of this rut that COVID put us in, but forced you to go into a system that you either did not know, did not have access to, and there was huge ramifications on Black businesses. So Black businesses around the country, you saw every headline, we don't have access to PPP. Black folks can't get access to it, our nonprofits, our churches. So Black people around the country retreated. They said, you know what? The banks that's on my phone, I go to these banks, I go on the app, I can't get a call back. Where's a Black bank? I need somebody to listen to what I have to say about saving my church, about saving my family, my business. And I don't need them, making a decision about my worthiness to survive based on the color of my skin. So they go to Black banks. And when they retreated to Black banks were undercapitalized and have been neglected far too long to answer the call to the greatest crisis of our time, economically. So the Black Bank Foundation was created to solve that, was created to make sure that Black banks have the capital they need and the expertise they need to answer the call of Black Americans across this country. And anybody, our goal is to make sure if anybody wants to bank Black in this country, it should be able to. And we do that in a couple of ways. One, by giving them access to our fund, which is a $250 million fund that funds Black banks. But two, we make Black banks stronger by helping white institutions, especially those that make money off of Black people. And I'm thankful that the NBA has been a big partner. The league is itself. 9 out of 10 players in the league are Black. So it's always good when we see institutions that make money off of Black people investing in Black people, right? So we literally did the first deal. We closed on it 2 weeks ago. Was the very first time a sports center in the history of any sport was funded top to bottom by Black banks. And that was in Atlanta with the Hawks. And that gave us an opportunity to show that Black banks, even the ones in Florida, were part of this, that Black banks around the country can pool their resources and be able to fund a deal that size. That means that one deal in Atlanta, it also, the money made from that deal through our banks came right back to Orlando, to Miami, and 27 Black cities across this country. And that turned into real opportunity for small businesses and churches. We're leveraging our resource. We're creating our own Black Wall Street. And we don't need an actual street anymore. We live in a virtual world. Black Wall Street is virtual. It is every Black person in this country has access to Black banks and Black fintech, so we can leverage our wealth to create what we know is the next step in generational wealth, which is passing down opportunity.
Thanks for sharing that. It's great work. And we applaud you and the board and the foundation. Dr. Bridget Williams, coming back to you to again return to the local scene. Recently, Senator Bracey and many others successfully, I guess, lobbied is the best way to say it, for the Ocoee Massacre to be integrated into the curriculum for public schools here in Florida and in Orlando. With everything that's been said already about Juneteenth, Black Wall Street, Black excellence, is it naive to think that the next generation now having access to this information will be inspired by this information, as Markel said, inspired to leverage their platform, inspired to open accounts with Black banks, inspired by this history, this rich legacy that will now be available to these students?
I think we can all agree that Black history is American history. I'm going to say that again. I think we all agree that Black history is American history, and we cannot teach one without the inclusion of the other. In addition to the stories of the Ocoee Massacre or the Juneteenth, Black Wall Street, or Black excellence, the inclusion of these stories in our curriculum only enhance student learning, as well as their understanding of the world around them. You have to understand your past in order to move forward, or to understand your future. Here in Orange County, our current instruction already includes the history of African Americans before the political conflicts that actually led to slavery, the passage to Americans, the enslavement experience, and the contributions of African Americans to society. That's what we've got to talk about. For instance, the story that Mayor Eddie Cole told, that was inspiring. I had no idea. So thank you for that story. And it would be great for the students at Hungerford Elementary School to hear that story. And what I'm hearing about the banks, we've got to share that with our kids, whether it's through the school system or through the church or through meetings that are held in the community. We've got to empower our own kids, our own community. And in fact, within OCPS, there are standards for each grade level. So OCPS students are exposed to African American history throughout their entire K-12 experience. In fact, we're collaborating with the Orange County Regional History Center to create a professional development series. In other words, we're providing PD for our teachers focused on the Ocoee Massacre. And the series will include, in fact, we have an OCPS Minority Achievement Office. Many folks are not aware of that. We're working with the Orange County Regional History Center and Darlene Jones with Channel 9. Curriculum and Digital Learning Department, which focuses on the instructional resources and how to engage students in this learning experience. We've got to engage our students. We've got to engage our students. We're also spearheading a working group of other districts, not just Orange County. We're working with Volusia, Seminole, Lake Osceola. We're putting together a working group to create a grade band instructional resources for our teachers to use in the classroom. We've got to work with our kids. When he mentioned earlier that he hadn't learned or was not included in the curriculum, it's included in our curriculum. We've got to include that in our curriculum. And also, I would like to add, we are very grateful for Florida Senator Randolph Bracey for his commitment to getting House Bill 1213 approved in June of 2020. Under the direction of the Education Commissioner's African American Task Force, the Ocoee Massacre will now be included and is required instruction. It's required instruction on African American history throughout the state of Florida, which enhances the work that we're already doing. And a lot of folks also are not aware of this, that Senator Randolph Bracey, there's a scholarship out there. The state has put aside $305,000, and that will help 50 students receive around, say, $6,000 per year to attend college or trade school. So students who are related to a victim of the massacre will receive scholarships, and the remaining dollars will actually go to those that live in the Ocoee area. So yes, I do believe that all generations are influenced in some shape and manner by the education that they've received. It makes a difference. It really does.
It makes a difference. Dr. Williams, you, Dr. Jenkins, your colleagues, you all are saints. You're on the front lines of this academic achievement gap and just African American empowerment. We thank you so much for your work. You're just amazing stuff.
Thank you.
Dr. Jeremy Levitt, we know slavery was abolished on June 19th in 1865, but we could probably argue that the fight for equality and equity and justice also started that day. In the wake of, May 25th, 2020, Black Lives Matter gained, significant, space in the collective consciousness of the country. But where do we go next in this movement from, Juneteenth to Black excellence? And unmute there, Dr. Levitt.
It's a great question. I think the speakers have touched on it in ways, and I'm happy to try and contribute to the conversation here. But we have to take a step back to really fully understand the question that you're asking. There's been about 24 massacres of African Americans in this country since Reconstruction, over 24. And these massacres are are often triggered by simple things like Black people trying to register the vote or assert fundamental rights guaranteed under the Constitution of this country. We talked about, Ashley talked about the 1921 aerial bombing in Tulsa. Well, we had the 1985 bombing of the MOVE organization in Philadelphia, which is the only other aerial bombing of a civil rights movement, and that was on African Americans in 1985. Most of us, perhaps with exception to young brother folks, were alive and well then. And then when we look at the history of movements from Marcus Garvey's UNIA movement to Du Bois's Pan-African movement to Booker T. Washington's self-reliance movement to the civil rights movement with leaders such as Martin King and Malcolm We go to the abolitionists, and we have Mary McLeod Bethune and Ida B. Wells Barnett. And we keep moving forward to the hip hop consciousness movement of the late 80s and 90s. And then we move into the Million Man March. The Black Lives Matter movement is just one of several movements that we've had in this country. And it's an important one because it marks, I think, a critical juncture in this younger generation's willingness to take the mantle of civil rights to the next generation. Mm-hmm. We continue to pass the civil rights baton from one generation to the other. But what's important now is that the young people who didn't have 4 weeks of training as we did in Montgomery during the bus boycott, they hit the streets protesting without necessarily the training that was needed for them to sustain it. So it lasted a summer. So they didn't go through, 3 weeks with Bayard Rustin, the architect of much of the civil rights era movements and protests. And they were out there with their hearts. So one is that we have to organize ourselves in a way when we protest, we do it lawfully and effectively, and we can do it and sustain it for a period of time. And we have to have a strategy and a target behind why we boycott for rights. So I think the future is we have to continue to do this. Education is a part of this conversation, and it's central. When we have young people who don't know who Thurgood Marshall was, when we have young people who don't understand the basics of civil rights, they can't sustain a movement. So the movement is a social media movement rather than a sustainable civil rights movement. And I think educating young people, and I spent a lot of time doing this and even with some of the Magic players, to try and spend time to teach them the principles of nonviolent direct action, to teach them about other movements around the world and the history of African Americans who went to go fight in North Korea to kill Nazis, only to come home to be lynched by local sheriffs. And then those that weren't in that situation were on the front lines of the Montgomery bus boycott and other movements in the country. I think the iconic patriots have been African Americans. The moral compass of the country in terms of civil rights have been African Americans. Every group has built their movement on the back and the blood and the toil of African Americans. So I think knowing the history, actually going backwards, is the solidified way for us to crystallize the movement going forward. And then we have to use all the means that are being used, the technology, the innovation, to hold companies, state governments, and our leaders accountable for moving this movement forward. Often, and what I'll say, and I'll end here, is that, the young people had a righteous, what I call a righteous kill with the racial justice movement of the summer 2020. But what's happened is that a lot of hyenas have come in to take that away from the lions that killed it. And so a lot of people are profiting from the work that was done. And I wonder whether the young people have profited enough and whether we are investing adequately in them, in change leaders and in change strategy.
Well said. And I'll translate. Black excellence has always been a thing. And there are modern iterations of it. We continue to add to it. But I ask this question because it gets asked a lot, and you're the right person to ask. People want to know, well, are we making progress? Or do we talk about it, but we don't really, walk the talk, quantify the progress, if you will. Some of it we've talked about already, but quantify that progress and tell folks, kind of what that progress looks like and what the future looks like. If this is done well.
We could do a whole conversation.
Separate conversation.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
I mean, I can't quantify it, but maybe what I can do is qualify it in this way.
Fair.
I think in areas of civil and political rights, we're seeing a step back to the Jim Crow era across the country. We're seeing legislatures across the country instituting laws that are, quite frankly, are draconian, from the anti-riot bill in the state of Florida to voter suppression laws across the country. I think that's a step backwards. But I think where we're stepping forward is a realization of the importance of economic development in our communities. I think we're moving forward where I've seen with my own eyes, white conservatives have their woke moments. Because the problem of racism in America is not going to be solved unless white men and women are involved on the front lines of trying to support change. And that's the bottom line. I've seen a level of wokeness with whites that wouldn't have looked at this issue a year and a half ago, who are looking at it differently, who are educating themselves, who are engaged in the conversation, and people are seeking to do something different. The problem is that there has to be more people saying diversity and inclusion initiatives in a corporation are not the same as racial justice initiatives. And if we want to solve the problems in the country, every company has hired a chief diversity officer. As you know, there are diversity and inclusion efforts across the country. That's not going to solve the race problem. We have to invest in racial justice initiatives and be bold about it. I think I've seen a turn in the hearts and minds of people in this country after the murder of George Floyd.
Yes.
And so at a qualification level, I think the moral compass of the country has moved forward, and people are ready to listen and have a conversation to have it. The problem with that, when we get to the quantifiable solutions, Americans have a short-term memory when it comes to race. And my fear is that this wave that we're on now is slowly subsiding, and there's not going to be any surfers on it in about 6 to 9 months. So our job is to keep them honest and to keep the conversation going. Otherwise, I think we're going to radicalize a generation of people, particularly African Americans, that are going to be anti-government. And we got to be very careful about this. The plight of deadly police violence we've seen in the country is a serious thing. And we've seen people radicalized to go fight overseas with Al-Qaeda. African Americans have been the last to fall into that bullywig. But we saw what happened in Dallas with the Dallas shooter. And what we want to do is get everyone on board to ensure that justice and equality and equity is available for everybody.
Thank you again for that. Markel, I want to come back to you. I'm checking in with you, Mark, because in many ways, you're kind of a microcosm of your generation. Love to know what your general thoughts are as you're, Juneteenth, Black excellence. These are popular hashtags on the internet, but what do they really mean to you?
I think to me, like I said before, although I'm still learning, I think Juneteenth is important to me because although it's been celebrated, a celebrated day as African American communities for years, I believe only recently has it become considered, being acknowledged as a federal holiday. That's and right. I think that it deserves to be recognized as such, And so for me, after saying that, Black excellence to me is like educating myself and trying to learn more and being my best self, and also helping my peers learn more about it, because as I'm getting older and as I'm learning more about it, I'm realizing how much I missed out on a lot of stuff that's happened before me, and I didn't realize how much people sacrificed and fought for me to have what I have now. And I want to make sure that I continue to impact and help this movement keep going. So
thank you for that, Markel. Here's what I want to do to kind of wrap this up. And again, I want to remind everybody who is tuning in to feel free to add your questions in the Slido platform, and we will try and respond to those questions in real time. But I want to come to the panelists. We're going to go with you, start with you, Mayor Cole first. I just want to get your kind of closing thoughts as we encourage people to lean into a deeper understanding of Juneteenth and how significant it is, and how we leverage this in this overall journey, as Dr. Levitt laid out, journey to continue to perpetuate and proliferate Black excellence. What's your perspective?
The thing that I'm happy about it, but the thing that scares me is, like every other holiday, we start off, we get fired up, and before you know it, 2 or 3 years from now, it's for pop-up shops, it's for a dance, it's for different things, and we forget the organic part of why we're celebrating this. Even to the Christmas, we've lost what it was really about. I don't want this to happen to at Juneteenth. There's so many things that we're behind on, not knowing late, that I hope that we take a moment. If we start doing all those different things, of making it kind of a commercial deal, that we really think about those people at that time that paved the way for us to be here right now. If we don't do that, it's just going to be another day. Another day and another day. It's time for us not to be like a meter where a situation has to happen. We put a quarter in the meter and we got some more time and then it expires. It's like another quarter. We have to have an eternal meter that continues to go. So where did that come from? It'll come from Markel. It'll come from that group. They are more aggressive than we are. Where we were ready to sing "We Shall Overcome." They're ready to do something now. And so everybody brings the history to each one of us. I have to say this before I get out of here. I'm originally from Ohio and Boston before I got here. But if it wasn't, and I was transferred here to work with kids in Orlando, how did I get in a little place called Eatonville? It was this little principal that when he talks to you, he rubs his hair back and he talks fast. And while he was scolding some kids, he was the only principal I knew that the parents loved him so much. He put me in his white van, went to a house, told the parents what his kid were doing, paddled the kid in front of the mama, brought him back, and still told me about the history of Eatonville. Before I knew it, after Mr. Rufus Brooks told me everything about Eatonville and why I should be here, I forgot about going to Orlando. I mean, my apartment complex was bigger than the whole city of Eatonville. But he got me rocked on it so much. So I hope that all of us do the same thing to Markel, and then Markel gives it to someone else. But if we don't be careful, if we don't have that spirit to tell the story about us, you know what? We're gonna be in a bad place. So that's our quest right now.
Yeah. Dr. Williams, what's your perspective? How do we rock the next generation and inspire them to continue this great legacy?
It takes a village. I think everybody has stated that. The school system, it takes the mayor's office, it would take the church, it would take those that are willing to come into our schools and mentor our kids. It would take Markel to actually not only sponsor this, but also additional events such as this for our kids. But our kids need to see him in our schools. They need to see that if they stay within the school system, they can grow up to one day to become a Markel or the mayor of Eatonville, or that they can work for the Florida A&M Law School. Our kids need to see this, because you're right. When he talked about how do we move forward, a lot of it has to do with, he's right. We got to make sure that our kids are in a position to where they can get a bank loan, to where they can open up their own business, where they can become entrepreneurs. But it starts out with the school system and also the community helping us to empower our kids. Eddie Cole mentioned my dad, who was the former local president of the NAACP. So believe me, in my household, we talked about empowerment, and we talked about the importance of Juneteenth, and we talked about Black excellence. We talked about those things in our household, but that's not happening every day in everyone's household. That's why it may need to happen in our church. It may need to happen when Eddie Cole was out talking with the kids at Hungerford Elementary School, or when Markel was out talking with the students in our school. We've got to come together to ensure that our kids are getting what they need in order to want to become entrepreneurs, in order to want to march with Black Lives Matter. We've got, and it can't happen, but we got to work together as a village to make that happen. And you've got the right folks here on this to make that happen. So I hope this is not the first or the last. I hope that this is one of many, so that we can get the word out that we're here to help our future. That's our kids.
That's right. And so, Ashley Bell, part of the village is financial literacy. That absolutely needs to be integrated, or continue to be integrated into our collective consciousness. What do you want people to do moving forward as it pertains to, developing relationships with Black banks, deepening the trust with Black-owned banks, and doing business with Black-owned banks? And how is that part of the solution?
Well, it's about investing in each other. It's about, we got three pillars in our community. You got HBCUs, you got Black banks, and you got the church. I mean, that's the stool at which we build everything. And so we have to invest in each other. So supporting a Black bank is like supporting a Black business. But it's more than just us doing it. Is when you go back to work and say you don't work for a Black business, say you work for somewhere else, are you asking the questions at your own business? Where do they bank? Is the place where you work banking at a bank under a consent decree for predatory lending? Are you working at a place that puts their money in communities that are and in things that are not advantageous to Black people? We have to speak up where we work and ask ourselves, and the people who employ us and the places we put our names affiliated with, do their values match their actions? And if you say you support Black lives, then you got to support the wealth that supports those lives. And the question is, why not? Why aren't you spending money with African Americans? And we have to speak up. And I think that Black banks are a critical part of it. But I think the bigger story is rethinking and reimagining what's possible. And I say this really quickly. Last Christmas, we watched Jingle Jangle. You know that show that came out, or the Christmas Carol? And I sat there with my son and I watched this movie about Black people that could fly, the great smartest Black man in the world. He had, all these Forrest Whitaker and all this great stuff. There was 2 white people in the movie. 2. One was a cop and one was a banker. They were the villains. So even when we make and imagine a great story about Black person being the smartest person in the world, we can't even think and imagine that the police are on our side or the banking system's on our side. We have to reimagine what we're capable of. And if you reimagine what we're capable of, you should be able to look at a Black bank and don't worry about it. It's not going to get you the same rates or whatever. Black banks can't execute just like every other bank. It's just that if you take the word bank off, then they get hit with every other thing every other Black person gets hit with. Not good enough, not smart enough, not equipped enough. And the bank part doesn't even matter. So we have to overcome how we believe in each other, how we imagine each other in the spaces that we can see each other in. And then I think we can bring the rest of the community, Black, white, yellow, brown, all together, and say that Black people are here. The products and services we offer are just as good as anybody else. And if we all do business with each other and we do business with ourselves, that is how we will close the racial wealth gap in this country.
Okay, but where I'm from, Brother Bell, we like to say, let's keep it 100. What say you to the folks who say, yes, I love that, agree with that, understand that, but my experience was, the customer service, the technology, etc.
Yeah, okay.
I didn't have the experience that I wanted.
I hear you on that.
Okay,
I hear you on that. I hear you on that.
Do it.
But ask yourself, what was your experience like with a white bank when COVID hit and you were trying to get a PPP loan? Mm-hmm. Ask yourself, who called you back when you sent in a message saying that my church needs the PPP or my business needs it, and nobody called you back? When that app on your phone was where you thought you had a banking relationship and nobody called you back. So, yeah, I hear what you're saying, but the system has proven to be what the system is. Mm-hmm. History is what history is. There is nothing in the history of financial inclusion in this country that would lead you to believe that you're going to get better service and that a bank that is not one that's in your community is going to treat you better. If your banker gets his haircut when you get your haircut and your hair done when you get your hair done, that's a different relationship than an app on your phone with some people you may never see. And we've proven that this generation through COVID has turned a blind eye to our community. Mm-hmm. Now, how can we possibly let that happen again? It's time to turn inward. It's time to invest in.
It needed to be said, so we said it. Dr. Levitt, we are coming to you for the last word here. There's literally only one question on Slido. That question is for you. You've already spoken to this a little bit and everybody else has contributed. But what has been asked is, how do we keep the momentum going and keep moving forward from your perspective? What do you want us to do? Unmute, Dr. Levitt.
The first thing is we have to look internal at ourselves. So here's my challenge. I'm gonna offer a challenge to everybody, particularly for the young people, but also the generation above 35. Read one book a month about your history. Just read one book a month about your history. And I'll give you the first one to start with. Start with The Miseducation of the Negro by Carter G. Woodson. Miseducation of the Negro by Carter G. Woodson. Read one book a month. I do think it's important to spend your money with Black businesses to the extent that you have Black businesses in your community. And if you need a drive to do that, then do that. And to look at the question of Black banking institutions. But that's not enough, because simply to spend money with Black folks without a strategy for why you're doing it and looking at new models of engagement, typically we tend to replicate the models that are already there without thinking about what our community needs are. So, for example, in several African countries that I've worked in, there are community banks where the members of the community are the actual shareholders of the bank. And the money is actually distributed to community projects within the community that empowers that specific community. We have some of that here, but we need to get back to thinking about creative ways based on the Black tradition in America and what our specific needs are. And then we have to develop a backbone and a courage to fight. Okay, so, Martin Luther King had trouble getting people to support him. Ministers ran away from him. Black folks said he's coming to our town to make trouble. And now we all celebrate him as if he was a prophet for all people that was supported by all people. Well, that's just not true. And so we have to have the courage and the backbone to stand out on the issues that are important and to take some risks when it's necessary to forward the agenda for our community. And we have to do that with a certain level of grace and love and humility, but also be willing to go forward with a strategy that is going to create conflict and antagonize a system that's based on institutionalized racism. And if we're not willing to do those things, which is self-educate, reinvest in ourselves and our communities in ways that service our communities, develop the courage and the backbone to continue to fight forward and to do it with a certain level of humility and love, then we're not going to make any progress. Those are the central pillars. Those are the things that when we look at Dr. King's beloved community, when we look at all of our leaders, those are four central themes. You'll never find a civil rights leader or a human rights leader that wasn't self-educated first. I think we have to begin there, and we have to do it now. It's more important now because there's so much information. Our young people don't even know what to read and what to go to. So we really got to hone that in. They're used to reading stuff in 1 minute on Instagram or a short post. We have to guide them. See, folks is laughing because he knows what I'm saying. We have to guide them in what to read, and we have to work with our children to have the capacity to sit down and actually read a book. For any parent today, it is the most challenging thing to get your children to focus and just sit down and read. We have to do that. Literacy is incredibly important, and Black literacy is even more important.
Hey, does the audio book count?
The audio book counts.
I'm trying to help Markel.
It doesn't count if you're trying to develop good habits, but it's one way to get at it. Yes.
That's right.
Yeah.
And Dr. Williams, this is not the only celebration for the Orlando Magic. You alluded to this earlier. Our offices will be closed in observance of Juneteenth. We are all grateful that it is now a federal holiday, or soon to be recognized federal holiday. We have given support for Black Friday, the Orlando Initiative, which promotes the value of patronizing Black-owned businesses. We're seeing the Magic will take part in a conversation, again, focused on Black excellence, featuring Val and Jerry Demings and Nadine Mentor Williams. So for everyone tuning in, we invite you to join us virtually for Saturday's event beginning at noon and continue the conversation by visiting us at orlandomagic.com. Walk with us. Ashley Bell, Dr. Bridget Williams, Mayor Eddie Cole, Markel Foltz, Dr. Jeremy Levitt, thank you all for an insightful and powerful and much needed conversation. Thank you to all of you for tuning in. Go Magic.
Go Magic.
Thank you, brother.
Thank you.
Thank you. God bless. God bless us all.
Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.